Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mitchell.
Good morning, Louise. Good morning, dear Volt. Glad to be back on the live session this morning for session number 4. So today is going to be quite an interesting session because, as you remember, last week we tried to cover quite a broad stroke on the project, and we only managed to cover the cold store side of it. This week we're now also going to cover the port efficiency, port capacity, and the look at shipping trends. And I was just saying in the introduction that it's a very interesting space that we're seeing at the moment, particularly around obviously what's happening in our ports at the moment, the current state of affairs, which I will address in a short while, and what's going to happen in Transnet in the next 2 years. So we received an address by Andile Shanku. I apologize, I might be getting his surname incorrectly pronounced. But he gave us a presentation yesterday, and it was the most enlightening presentation around Transnet, the state of Transnet, and then what's going to happen in Transnet. And it talks very much to what I've been saying. So the cat's out the bag. He's spoken very bluntly about it, so we don't need to hide around corners and be sensitive about it. And Michelle Phillips as well gave us an update and spoke truth to it. So I'll be reporting a little bit on that. And then we go into the shipping space. We're seeing some very interesting dynamics coming into our shipping space with the announcement of new services, and we're seeing new ships coming in, which I'm going to talk about in the session as well. So very exciting session. So we can get into it when you're ready.
Yeah, we invited quite a number of people, and the response has been good online, especially on LinkedIn. So again, we want to state that if anybody's got any questions, you can type it in the comment section. I will get it on the side and put it on the screen, and then we can discuss it. And over on LinkedIn, over on YouTube, I've put up a little poll just with a couple of questions to see what and it's more for engagement than for getting hard science facts from it.
Great. So as you can see, I forgot to mention, I'm actually sitting in the Western Cape. I'm actually in an orchard. So hopefully the noise is not going to be too much with tractors and things in the background. No, I'm just kidding. And you can see I'm wearing, many would recognize this shirt from the symposium, and you'll see I wear it to special occasions. So we're looking quite fruitful this morning.
Love it.
Right, Mitchell, if you're ready, you've got the stage. You can go.
Yes. So okay, as I mentioned, let's talk about Transnet. We're going into the port space now, so let's talk about the realities of what's happened. And actually, it's been a very, very interesting week for us. So you would have noticed on some of my uploads, we went to see the vessel One Readiness, which came into port on Sunday. We went to visit the vessel on Monday afternoon, and it was an exciting, very exciting development to see that. Highly innovative, very technologically advanced vessel. And there's 2 of them, and the One Reassurance has also come into the SAIC service, which is the Europe-South African trade route, and coming in at the right time because we need to see highly innovative vessels come into the space, looking at addressing carbon footprint issues and emission issues, which are obviously being regulated, highly regulated in the shipping environment. So it talks to that. It also talks to greening our supply chain with highly technologically advanced propulsion systems, limiting the emission aspect. So that's very exciting to see because we want to start to green the citrus supply chain, and that's the start of what we're seeing. And very focused on the reefer element of the vessel as well, which is obviously carrying a lot of the fruit to market. So chatting to the captain of the vessel, he was asking a lot of questions about our fruit trade. Yeah, there it is. And we dialogue quite a lot about the ship and how it addresses our immediate needs in terms of capacity and all that. So he was very interested in our environment. Then we had an address yesterday. We went to attend the Western Cape feedback session on the Cape Town port, but we had an address from Michelle Phillips and the chairperson of Transnet, Andile Shanku. And he just gave us an absolutely amazing feedback session on the state of play at Transnet and how Transnet's going to evolve into the next 2 or 3 years, with radical transformation going to happen in Transnet on many facets. So I think the main aspect to draw on there is that we understand Transnet's in a very difficult space at the moment. A lot around when they talk about the labor aspect, performance of labor, talking about the equipment elements around, as we know, the failing equipment because it's very old. It wasn't maintained to meet those maintenance schedules. It's now caught up with the ports. And we are in a space that's going to take about 2 or 3 years, both on rail and on the ports, to rectify. through interventions around procuring equipment and starting to get staff to be a lot more motivated in their environments by incentivizing and that sort of thing. So he said quite clearly, there's no silver bullet that's going to fix transit. As you know, I've said the same thing. And we're going to be sitting in a 2 or 3 year phased approach to rectify the situation. So we're going to talk to this on the CGA roadshows that will be starting next week to inform our growers around the exact position on transit. And then obviously it's going to need proper contingencies over the next 2 or 3 years to work around the current situation. So we're going to have to come up with contingencies in the interim period while Transnet gets itself back to a position of international standard of performance. So that's going to be our sort of communication, my communication to growers as we go into the roadshow. So that's really where it is, and it's not across all of the Transnet divisions. I mean, there's pockets of excellence in Transnet. To be honest with you, we know the Coega port is relatively new. You know, the NCT, the Coega terminal. So most of the equipment there is actually quite new and that sort of thing. So you can see and it plays out in their productivity. We did an analysis, and Coega terminals is, in terms of performance, is actually performing better than Cape Town and Durban. In fact, all the terminals. So, you know, there are pockets of excellence, but it's performing better than the worst. If you know that our port's still very, very poor in terms of international standards, so it's performing better than the rest of the country's terminals. And then the rail space, we spoke about it. There's going to be an evolutionary journey to get back to that space, and it's going to be one we're going to have to watch very closely on how to influence that into our industry. So that's the feedback on Transnet at the moment. So I think let's move on to opening up the presentation. I'm going to just share my screen with you guys. And this should be, again, in presentation mode. And as I said, I see it in presentation mode, so I can't see the live session. So if you have any questions, you're just going to have to jump in and stop there.
We will do that.
Okay, are we all good?
Good.
Yep.
Excellent. So as I mentioned, we're going now into the port space around capacity, performance, seeing where we are from a terminal perspective, and obviously looking at the constraints that we've currently faced with. And then we're going to go into the shipping space, just looking in terms of where Justin's going to report on market development and how that's going to need capacity development on specific shipping routes and obviously on specific services. And I'll talk to you about some of the introduction of new services coming into our industry this year, in fact, which is quite exciting.
Okay.
So we've covered session 1, session 2, and session 3. We're now in session 4 and session 5. I won't talk too much on this, but as I mentioned that, you know, partners, we're going to need a partnership with exporters to unlock a lot of our logistics constraints. And we're going to need partners and logistics people to work together, cooperate to unlock logistics, and particularly in our shipping space, which I'm going to show you shortly. Again, just looking at the map, it does lend itself to this session, because if you look at the shipping space, and I'm going to show you this in the detail, it's quite interesting to see that the different regions actually supply to different markets in different volumes, which is quite interesting. So you'll see the northern region has a very strong presence into the Far East markets, Eastern Cape mainly into Europe and into Middle East, and Western Cape mainly into USA and into the Northern Europe market. So the shipping services and shipping routes are very different in each region as well, which is quite interesting. So from just about every aspect, each of the corridors are very unique in their own characteristics from start right to shipping. And I'm going to show you that in the slides I'm going to present. Okay, I'm going to talk to this very busy slide. So when we start analyzing what's going to happen in the shipping space, we have 2 modalities of shipping. As you know, the specialized reefer ships. When I came into the industry in the 90s, there was not much container exporting taking place. A few container exports here and there in port hole containers, not in the current highly technologically advanced reefer containers. So specialized ships were the thing in that day, and we were loading at that point at the Durban terminal up to 5 vessels at a time to the different markets, Middle East and into Japan and up into Europe mostly. So we've still got the 2 modalities. The presence of specialized reefers fallen away quite a lot with the advent of containers coming into the space. So I have to evaluate the different modalities in terms of where we're going to see container growth and where we're going to see specialized reefers. So if you look at it from a port perspective, and as I said, each port has its own characteristic about market supply. If you look at Cape Town, the specialized reefer moving very strongly into the USA market. So that's still existing, and that's there's been quite a move across to containers, particularly in the last season. And I think that move across to containers is probably going to be progressive into the current years, and I'm going to explain why. So you can see a downward trend on specialized reefers and upward trend on containers on the back of that aspect. If we look at Durban, we would normally see quite a lot of specialized reefers moving to Japan. We also recently introduced the co-load of Japan and China. Unfortunately, with the advent of COVID, there was a bad situation on those vessels that were co-loaded, caused quite a dilemma in the receiving of China. So that kind of circumvented that initiative, and it's back to now probably 1, 2, or 3 vessels going to Japan on the specialized reefer. So a lot of that's moving into containers. So that's why that's dipping down. In fact,
Mitchell?
the number projection you see this, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think that people that don't know the protocols there is that China don't allow other shipments to be with theirs. I'm not, if I'm sure, I think Japan is also not allowing really. So they might be sticky about that. So if something happens, we can understand why the feathers will get ruffled.
Yes, so the first year that it was done, it was well accepted. The department engaged with the Japanese and Chinese authorities, as long as they were separated in different decks. Obviously, a different protocol. There was no compromise of the cargo. It's completely separated in the holds of the ship. And that what happened actually in COVID was they were not allowing the vessels from South Africa to come into Shanghai. They then had to be diverted to another port, and that took 3 or 4 weeks to actually off discharge. So I think with that issue, the exporters obviously realized, listen, there is some risk factors there. So it was stopped at that point. But perhaps it can be picked up again at some point. You know, there's no reason why it can't.
I also know that with the Chinese protocols that in pack houses and cold storage, there needs to be a separation of 1.5 meters or more between different shipments for different markets.
Yes, which if you look in the cold stores, they actually are. There's a big separation of those consignments. And then Durban also, in the last 2 years, with the conflict happening between Ukraine and Russia, most of the shipping into Russia has been via conventional vessels. Not the containers have stopped moving from Rotterdam transshipping into St. Petersburg, I think because of the conflict and obviously the restrictions on that. So there was an upward trend on shipments to Russia and break bulk. And what's fallen away is the shipments of specialized reefers to Europe. I think because of the Europe false cod and citrus black spot requirements, it's a little bit complicated to ship in specialized. But we have seen last year in particular quite a big uptake into shipments to Europe on the specialized reefers. So that's the dynamic around Durban. And then in the Eastern Cape, most of the shipping on specialized is really just going into Russia. Because the shipping is controlled mainly by the Russian importers, and they obviously prefer to go into specialized reefers. So that's where the trend on that is. And looking at Maputo, it's a very, as I've mentioned before, it's not a very clear outlook on what's going to happen in Maputo. In 2027, I mean, look, I've only put 1,000 containers, but I think it's obviously at this point it's higher than that, so I maybe need to relook at that. But we'll see what happens on the trended analysis this year. That will increase most definitely, I guess, with what we're seeing in Durban. So there's the ratio between the two. And the specialized reefers, again, I'm going to show you some pictures just now. Maybe people are asking, okay, why are we not using specialized reefers anymore? And why is it now moved so much into containers? I think because of a couple of the protocol complications on specialized reefer ships. But I think for me, the best one is the biggest factor is the cost aspect, because I'm going to show you something just now, which is quite interesting. And yesterday I was sitting in Bloberg looking out into the sea, and you could see the vessel, the Santa Teresa, was anchored off next to the vessel Whitney Bay. Now, Whitney Bay is a specialized reefer ship. And it's almost like a pimple against a haystack. It's just the comparison in size of ship is just quite fast. And I'm going to show you the loading capacities of the two. So you can imagine the economies of scale. You're competing against something that is so much more economically cost effective than an old ship that was built in the 1980s, which is still running old type engines and all that sort of thing. So the comparative in cost is just probably what's driving it.
And then also another factor is that you need to load pallet heights. You load a smaller pallet, so less fruit on a pallet for conventional shipping.
Yeah, again, thank you. Actually, that's also another big point on that is the high cube pallets. So high cube pallets can go into containers. They can't go into most of the specialized reefers. I think the only one which I'm going to show you now is the Cool Eagle, which can load high cube pallets. So if you're transiting pallets on trucks and through cold stores, if you're running high cube, you're running less pallets because you've got more cartons in the pallets, and obviously it makes it economically viable. So it's not in the shipping space, it's the landside space which has a cost benefit because of the high cube element. But in saying that, let's look at the trended analysis between the two modalities. So specialized reefers, I've been punting specialized reefers because I know with the current complications we have around Transnet, and I must say, container loading, it's a very laborious exercise. You have to collect a container from a container yard, transport it to a cold store, pack it, and then transport it to Transnet facilities. Or likewise to FPT if you're loading break bulk. There's a triangulation, and it's so hugely complicated, that environment. And with the growth in terms of what we're going to see now, it's only going to be more complicated as more containers are needing to be moved through the system. And the setup of containers, for one example, the container depots, are not in areas which are conducive to high truck volumes. I must be honest with you. They're in areas which are very tight in terms of road access, limitations on space to be able to handle containers. So it's a very difficult space to work around, and we can't get involved with that. It's the shipping lines who dictate where containers go. And obviously penetrating the terminals with containers in the case of Durban and Cape Town, we see on the WhatsApp groups, it's also very difficult with congestion and that sort of thing. So specialized work very well because the pallets go into the FPT and the coal terminal in Durban, for example, Cape Town, FPT and PE, and move from the quayside straight onto the ship. So it's, in terms of its logistics, it's very well suited and for high efficiency, And so I've been punting to keep the ratio between the two on a balanced phase, which is difficult because obviously we've just outlined the cost aspect, some of the protocol adherences. But again, we're going to need to really, relook at this. If you look now in the deciduous season, you look at my charts, Dewald, it's going on to 13 vessels from 2 or 3 last season to 13 this year. There's still 2 ships sitting outside the port to go into Cape Town. So as a contingency measure against certain aspects, it really has its place. And, they always punt this thing fast and direct, and they are fast and direct. They go from port to port straight, and the container vessels move between ports. And if you see the delays now that are happening on the container lines via the ports. So we're going to need to work strongly to keep this mode of shipping in our space.
Mitchell,
and hopefully we can work
I have a question, and that is, if you look at this, I mean, there's the trend, as you say, containerization grew very rapidly in the last 2 decades. But we're still using the reefer ships. What is the situation internationally? And we're just talking about South Africa, but are we going against the world trend? Does this still happen in pockets in other parts of the world? It would just be good to get a bit of an idea of, like, is this happening elsewhere? Any kind of more global comment on this?
Definitely. So the trend going towards COVID was strong move to reefer containers. I mean, if we look at South America, you look at the Kiwi trade from New Zealand into Europe was moving from conventional over to containers. And that trend was happening at a fast rate. And even in South Africa, most countries that were moving fruit and fresh produce were moving to containers because I think of the cost aspect. And obviously, we also know that the specialized reefers, in terms of the age profile, the scrapping of specialized reefers is happening at a fast rate. So, the availability of specialized reefer tonnage is just not there as it was many years ago as well. So that's also the driving factor. But going into COVID with the complications of global shipping, we then started to see that focus back to specialized reefers. If we look at South America contracting with sea trade on a direct route, we looked at the Kiwis going back into conventional. We had to go to conventional on certain aspects because of the trade flows as well. But we limited in terms of supply of tonnage and some of our heavy protocols to markets which are not evident to other trades. So the trend is there also because on the back of a dwindling specialized reefer tonnage. Now, looking at the recent builds, Seatrade and Baltic Shipping have built new ships, but not in any way, keeping the tonnage trend balanced. It's phasing away, and I think as we move over the next 5-10 years, the older generation specialized, like the Whitney Bay, which is outside the port, is built in 1980 something, 1990. They're going to have to be scrapped at some point because it's just competing against something which is just highly economically different. So I think while they're still able to run them, they will, and over time they'll phase out. Unless there's some radical new building of specialized, I think that trend is going to move back to containers with that current scenario. If anybody has any different outlook on that, it would be interesting to see. But I'm also reading the jury reports, which tell us the same thing. So guys, look at that yellow bar at the bottom. That is the, sorry, Louise, did I answer that?
No, I just said thank you for that, because we tend to look at South Africa. We tend to just be very focused on our own country, which is important. But to kind of see what's happening on a global scale, it's good to know. Thank you.
We're going to look. You probably know by now, it's been publicised. There's a shipping in Durban coming up first sort of 2 weeks of March, where growers want to talk about their shipping space, and you're probably going to I'm going to just probably display there that at some point we're going to need to contract these vessels in to keep the balance on that as a contingency, number one, keeping that space going, and also then just having those reefers in our shores, like you see with the deciduous season. We've got to have the contingency, keeping these vessels going in our shipping space, and we're going to have to talk about how we do that. So look at the final number. There's the most important one you see there. If you look at the reefer FEU, again, sorry, let me put my pointer on. So this line here, so if you look at the pallet numbers that I've equated into specialized, you can see there I've put it at 150. And remember, this is going to the 2027 projection. And there's very strong evidence showing that the specialized reefer is moving away, but it's a trend analysis again, trend analysis S1. So we'll need to change it if anything changes on that front. But look at the container demand that's going to come into our shores. So we look at the radical jump from 2020, 2021, 10,000 additional containers over the season. 2022, 96,000. 23 was the same, about 95, 96,000 containers. 2027, there's going to be a potential demand of 122,000 containers needing to be brought into South Africa's ports to move that demand on fruit. And now this is, again, Devil, this is only citrus. So we don't know the avocados, the deciduous season. It can push that number into radical numbers. And that's for me, an interesting one about the supply of empty containers, from the global repositioning to our shores to match that demand. And I'm going to show you the specific weeks around how that's going to create additional capacity requirements from the terminal aspect. And I'm going to draw on that just now. So if you look at the pallet numbers, it's going to move from just over 2 million pallets to about 2.7 million pallets. So it's quite a big undertaking, and I'm going to show you some more data on there. So can I move off this chart?
I've just got a quick question, Mitchell. Who owns the containers? Who the actual boxes?
There's two ways they do it. Either they buy outright, so you get container lines that buy containers and have them manufactured, or they lease them from leasing companies. So leasing companies will buy or build containers, and they will lease them to the shipping lines in a leasing pool. And you also find, very interesting enough, there's a third dynamic. So if you look at the SAIC service, and I might be wrong, but I hope I'm right, that they actually have a pooling of containers between shipping lines. So let's say, for instance, Hapag-Lloyd, One Line and Maersk may pool their containers into their stream, so they can either use each of their containers. So it also helps to cater for that demand. I don't think it's all over, but in certain cases they pool. So there's those three dynamics on containers in terms of ownership and pooling.
Okay, so
ownership, leasing, pooling.
Can somebody start a container business and start building containers and leasing it to
well,
these
that's
companies?
again developed. I mean, it surprises me, all your questions. They're actually really good. We think that we should be manufacturing containers here in Cape Town. We have a high export demand on fruit. So you would want your container to be placed where you can use it at the port to manufacture. And what a better case to have it built here in Cape Town. We look at the demand on our containers, why aren't we manufacturing? And I've spoken to some of the lines, and they say labor aspects, cost of materials, all those sort of things. But maybe it's something we need to address with the Western Cape government, and Valelia will watch this. And Valelia, maybe there's something in your department that you want to look at creating refrigerated container building capacity somewhere here in the Western Cape. I think it's a really great idea.
Interesting.
Are we good?
Yes.
Okay, so here's a quick slide I wanted to show you now. Why I'm showing you this is the economies of scale between specialized and containers. This is the world's largest specialized reefer ship. I think it still stands that way. It takes 7,200 high cube pallets below deck, so high cube pallets. It's probably the only one, I think, unless there's another vessel that's been built behind this one, that can take high cube under deck, and it takes 400 containers, 40-foot containers on deck. So it has a total capacity of 1.2 million pallets. Pallets. 1.2 million cartons. So that's quite a lot of fruit going into that ship. And it came into Durban in May. We actually sat with Charles Gans from Anlin earlier on in 2021. And I said, listen, let's bring this cool eagle into South Africa. And he said, no problem, I'll bring it. And he brought it for us in May. We had a huge amount of fanfare around it. we went on the ship and I met the captain and I took him some fruit, and it went all the way through the vessel and he showed us the whole thing. It was so impressive. So there is the space where I think we need to look at, in my opinion, if we're gonna hold the specialized reefers in our waters, these are the vessels that we need to see coming in the high cube aspect, highly technologically advanced and more efficient than the older generation. So this is something I've been trying to punt, but we'll see how it goes. So as I told you, on Monday we went to see the One Readiness. It was on its maiden voyage to Durban. Very exciting. I was so glad to jump on. It was so interesting to see this. And as I say, it talks right to the back of Vision260, where we need to see additional capacity on ships, new technically advanced vessels, efficient vessels, and vessels that have a high reefer capacity. And look at the bottom there. It takes 7,200 TEU containers. So if we load that ship full with citrus, all containers with citrus fully loaded, 72,000 pallets, 5.76 million cartons. So it's 5 times more capacity than even the biggest specialized reefer vessel. So there you can see economies of scale talk there for itself.
A question, Mitchell. Yes, it can carry all that, and the Cool Eagle will carry that. What's it, 1.5 million or something cartons? Okay.
Yeah.
How much of this 7,200 containers being loaded onto this ship will be fruit?
So Captain told us that they brought these vessels in and they're geared specifically for fruit, and they've geared these vessels to the South African fruit trade. I want to say this under correction because I thought maybe it wasn't the right. I need to speak to Ian. Ian McIntosh and Stephen Naidu from One Line Around the real capacity. Captain said 1,094 reefer plug points on the ship. You know, it's driven by 3 very highly advanced generator sets under deck, and they're fed through to the different cabling aspects on the vessel. So 1,094 reefer plugs, I thought was quite small. I'm going to show you some numbers now on the SAGs where they go up to 1,500. So maybe we misheard, or he is an Indian, so maybe we misheard what he said. But I'll get the right number. 1,094 was the number I concurred with someone else, but we'll get that figure. So I'm saying it should probably be about 1,500, if not going into 2,000. But that's what it stands at the moment. But remember, it's only just fits in the vessel, so it can increase capacity if there's a demand. I mean, you just put another generator and more plug points. So it's not like it's fixed and limited. You can increase it.
But if you take, for instance, a Cool Eagle, that will be loaded fully with just South African fruit going to a market. Am I correct in saying that? Or will there be other markets, fruit in there that comes from somewhere, going somewhere, and we are just a stop along the line?
Yeah, so most cases the vessel will come fully empty. I haven't seen any cargo coming from other countries. I mean, why would you come from South America or from somewhere else and carry fruit to that sort of extent to come to us? So they load full and complete, and mostly they'll load it with citrus, say complete, or otherwise they'll take avocados on deck in containers. They may go to Cape Town, load some apples and pears, which they did in Cape Town as well. So it loads multiple fruit from local shores, and they put it in the different holds to make sure the temperature requirements are separated, and also the protocols are separated within the hatches and deck spaces underneath the vessel. The on-deck containers will be just like a container vessel. You can load anything on top there.
So, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong. So if reefer vessels of this size call and they just load South African fruit, the chance of them transporting more fruit per go versus a container ship loading bicycles and iron ore and some fruit could be higher.
Let me just repeat the question. I don't have it quite correct, I don't think.
Okay, so let's say you've got Cool Eagle size ships or even slightly smaller coming in. They are only loading South African fruit. So for instance,
Southern African fruit.
Yes. So the Cool Eagle will load up 7,200 high cubes pallets and off it goes. Whereas that other container ship will load a mixed cargo. There will be some fruit and some other commodities and whatever. So the chances of transporting more fruit with a reefer vessel versus a container vessel is a possibility.
Well, I don't know. So if you think of let's take 1,000 containers on the One Readiness that you see here. So how many pallets is 1,000 containers? It's 20,000 pallets. Have a look at the pallet capacity here. It's 7,000 under deck 400. So it's looking at about 10, 11, 12,000 pallets. So still, it's loading double capacity on that. Even with that 1,000, some vessels are loading up to 2,000 containers on the Europe trade. So no, the vessels, in citrus season are loading far more citrus on the container ships than they are even fully loaded in the Cool Eagle.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on from this interesting exercise, and yeah, as I said, it came in on Monday, so look out for it. In fact, this vessel is bypassing Cape Town. It's actually going down to PE. Probably, I think it would have left. In fact, it might be coming to PE now, and then it's going straight to Europe to bypass the situation in Cape Town. And by the way, I must mention to you that the current impasse in Cape Town will be rectified. Our outlook shows next week, so vessels should be arriving and loading, leaving on arrival. So that's a good space, but it can change. There's some wind coming this weekend, but that's the outlook for next week.
Good news.
So now we look at very good news. And it came much earlier because normally it happens in March, and here we are in February. So in fact, it was shown in those stats on yesterday, Louise, that the terminal's productivity is actually increasing. I took some photos of the new RTGs, which I'll share via my link just now. I forgot to do it yesterday. Looks like they're positioned mostly in the reefer stacks. So then obviously those big red ones can go and place the containers to the ship. So the productivity is now getting higher. They're loading, they're moving about 1,800, just close to 2,000 containers now. So it's getting up. The trend is upwards, which is great.
Good.
So looking at the ports in terms of the container footprint through the weeks, and now again, this talks very much to what we were showing on the production side and export. Just goes to show on the red bars there and the red line, the trended analysis by port. And if you look at Durban, it's going to move from just about 96,000 containers to 120,000 containers. Hang on, I've got it wrong here. This is the total demand. I was looking at this thing. If this is Durban, then I must maybe look for another job. But it's 100,000, 96,000 to 120,000 containers in total. And you can see that right at the sort of peak weeks between Lake Manders, Valencia, where that peak demand is going to come, requiring over 6,000 to 7,000 containers per week to move through the port. So it's quite an undertaking. If you look at that trend over there, it's between 4 and say 4.5 to 5 at max. So it's quite a number that needs to be brought in on a weekly basis to cater for that demand that we see there.
And this is countrywide. This is all the ports.
Countrywide. And as you said, how do I factor in the other fruits into this equation? From Cape Town specifically, the avocados. So we're going to have to collaborate with our other associations, fruit types, to put this together as one complete format to show where the growth is going from all fruit kinds. This is just citrus, and so it's important for us to bring those into context, particularly for the shipping lines, to know how many containers they need to bring into local shores. Looking at Durban, again, here's Durban. So Durban moved from about 50,000 containers to about 65,000 containers. Now, the way I see it from this is to 2027. I think this year is going to be where we're going to hit close to 60,000 containers based on the trend that we're hearing from farmers on the production side. So this red bar that you see there is going to come potentially quite quickly in this year. So if you have a look at the container demand, the early part of the season with the specialized going to Japan and Russia, and that it doesn't put so much pressure through the grapefruit season. But once the markets switch over to Europe and China and Far East and that, the container demand moves up to about 3,500 containers needing to move through Durban. On a trended sort of analysis, you can see it runs to about 2.5. So an additional 1,000 containers potentially will need to move through the system in Durban. That's a very big undertaking, considering the current constraints. And there you can see that peak. Again, as we see right through the northern regions of supply chain, that peak week on all aspects is going to put a lot of pressure through the system. And if you consider the movement, as I mentioned to you, the collection of containers, packing and sending into port, we're going to need to look at some fundamental projects around how to manage that.
Sure.
Moving into PE Kuche, you can see they're up to 25,000 containers. It's difficult to get a full grasp of it because the Eastern Cape moves quite a number of containers down to Cape Town, up to Durban, have had to do so because of shipping issues. And obviously, if you want to go to North America, you catch the vessel which leaves Cape Town straight. So the vessel would come into the Amex service, comes to PE, Durban, then Cape Town. So if you're loading Amex from Eastern Cape, you would have to wait via Durban, then via Cape Town to get your fruit out to market. So that's what that dynamic is. But that red line again, moving from about 22,000 containers up to about 32,000 containers. So another 10,000 containers needing to come into that port's system. So it's also quite a radical undertaking. And if you see there again, that sort of peak pressure around Lake Mandarins and Valencias. So that's also going to be an interesting one into the PE terminals and the Kuche container terminal around capacity constraints, wind issues in the port, and now the truck booking system's coming in this year into NCT. So we're going to need to collaborate. And I think Wandisa is on the line with us today. She did say she was joining us. So Wendy, we're going to need to speak to you as soon as possible around how we're going to align for the current season and going forward as well. And then looking at Cape Town, as I mentioned, Cape Town, I was talking to some of the guys at the meeting yesterday, particularly Oscar Borchers, who's asking Rajesh Dana, the port manager, what are we going to do for citrus and the growth? I said, guys, I can assure you there is sufficient capacity for citrus season, probably twofold, because the city is in terms of numbers are double what we do, even with the growth coming towards 2027. So about 22,000 containers again, just over to about 26. So that port's should be able to handle that. And we spoke about cold store capacity. We were just talking now about the Balkan footprint, and I'm going to probably touch on that now. And also there's about 3,000 plug points available at the Cape Town container terminal, which in citrus season doesn't surpass 50-60%. And then obviously the operations work a lot better because that high volume is not there in the season. So we're well off in Cape Town, so well off that we think we need to start to look at moving to divert cargo from the north down to Cape Town. And there's, as I mentioned to you, there's some projects we're working with the Western Cape on the rail footprint to hopefully see that happen, so they can capitalize on this additional capacity that's available where we have a capacity crunch in the northern area.
Yeah, Mitchell.
So if we talk, yeah.
With the meetings that you've had yesterday in Cape Town with the ports, and you mentioned to us before we started that Alan Windy spoke, and I know he's very vocal about the situation in the ports. What did they say? Let's say, for instance, the DA or the Moonshot Coalition, whatever, wins the election, what is their plans with the ports nationally?
It would probably be a bit flirtatious for me to talk on that, but I'm guessing, I can almost outline if that was what were to happen. I guess, although think about it, Dewald, the ports are where they are at the moment, and if you even come with whatever amount of money and focus, it's going to take 2 years in any event to fix the port. So even if the Moonshot guys came in, or DA, whoever it might be, is a different dispensation. Even with Eskom, with the load shedding, with the power generation, it is what it is. And if you can come in, you're not going to change it with the major focus that's currently in place. So I don't think anything much would happen. They would probably, hopefully, maybe be able to accelerate, procurement and allocate more funds. And maybe there's a different element to that sort of thing. But it is what it is, and it's going to take. And all the effort is currently in place to try and change the situation. So it may not have a major sort of change. Maybe some more private sector participation might be accelerated. We know that there's probably more of an appetite for private sector participation, either through partnerships or outright. Maybe there will be a different focus there. That's maybe one element which would definitely come, I think, on the back of that, which might change the dynamic in our total logistics chain from that point of view. So I hope I answered that as best I could.
Yeah, it's kind of the idea
that when a question like that gets thrown at you. So well done, Mitchell.
Yeah. No, well, actually, I've thought about it. I thought, what if there's a massive political dispensation change in the country? What would it lead to in terms of fundamental changes in our port and logistics system? And that's really the two answers: is you can't do much more than you're doing now, number one, and maybe there's more of a focus on privatization in the space. Then maybe the less of the appetite at the moment is the best way to maybe outline it. In interest of time, can we move on?
From what I understand is that the private investors are sitting out there with salivating mouths, just waiting for that to happen so that they can move in.
Well, it's funny, that exact comment was made yesterday, saying that there are companies salivating on our shorelines with huge amounts of money, not only in our port space, but in our economy. And they're saying if we turn around our economy and we get things in the right sort of space, and we've got huge capital investment coming in. I mean, I spoke to you about the capital investment just on our cold store space, even with the current constraints in the country and the dilemma with energy and with our port system. We've got hundreds of millions of rands of investment coming in cold store capacity, just as one example. You look at our farmers, and this is why this Vision260 so important. Look at the amount of money they're spending on orchards, new orchards and pack houses and highly advanced pack houses, changing to mechanization and that huge investment. There's so much investment in this space. It's actually incredible. And it could be a lot more, and one of the growers, in fact, yesterday, it was actually, I nearly came to tears. There was a grower in the meeting yesterday outlining the current situation in Cape Town and saying that he's got no business left. He's making no money. His fruit's getting rotten into the market. He's going to have to cut jobs. And he said, listen, if you change the space, I can invest much more and be more, have more returns to reinvest in my people and my product and this is what it's doing. It's holding back investment. So it was highly sad to hear that. We don't want to hear farmers that are not being sustainable. We've got to sort this thing out.
It's not just about investment. Is that the growers, wherever they are in South Africa, especially the fruit industry, they basically uphold a small little town with the amount of people that's working for them.
Absolutely. And this is the thing. If we break, let's say, for example, hypothetically, if we have a disaster, we've had some very bad seasons on citrus side around markets, pricing, and some of the costs that have gone up to radical levels, the port situation. If it continues like this and we start to see the folding of and we have seen it, we're seeing farms folding at the moment. The communities in rural areas are highly dependent on farmers and agriculture. And if this growth rate that we see in the system at the moment, if that happens and we manage to materialize, can you imagine the economic benefit it's going to have in rural communities? Let it go the other way. It's going to cause an absolute upheaval in rural communities where people are highly dependent on agriculture and farming. And to be honest with you, the farmers carry a lot of the rural development. I go and see very impressive projects where farmers are sustaining rural communities and highly dependent on farmers. So again, we've got to get this thing right to make sure we sustain it and grow these rural areas.
And even take away the rural areas. Think of, let's say, there's looking for this year, let's say 150 million, 160 million cartons of citrus. That's on one particular thing, 160 million less stickers going on those boxes. There's 160 million less boxes that needs to be glued. Those kind of people also it's all a knock-on effect of this whole bloody thing.
Yeah, so the downstream, upstream supply chain, we talk numbers on farms, dependency, but let's talk about dependency through the entire logistics chain, logistics companies, suppliers of goods to farms and services and that sort of thing. It's massive. It's huge. And it's only going to grow all the way upstream, downstream while we get to this 240 million cartons. If we get to it, it's going to have a huge economic benefit to our economy and those companies and people that are dependent on the industry.
And in many cases, the fruit is already planted. The trees are growing.
Yeah,
we've got to make it work because the wave is already coming and it's upon us. And the efforts that you guys are making, to work on getting all of this done is really working towards that economic boom that could very well happen. So, just to add to the last comment, sorry to keep you, but please go ahead.
Yeah, but that's why I say, luckily that Transnet caught this when they did. Let's say, for example, it was left for another year or two, and then we still got another 3 years to fix it. It would have completely collapsed this industry. So they've caught it now, and it's going to be in hand at least in the next, as long as they're on the right track and the trajectory in terms of their turnaround strategy is on time. And it's not going to be. It'll be different ports will increase capacity and performance ahead of others. The ICT guys coming into Pier 2 in April will probably hopefully change it. So luckily we're on the front end of changing the situation in line with this growth of Vision260. Good timing. So, well, it could have been better, but it's good timing all the same. So looking at how we look at the port capacity in terms of what capacity do we need to see in the port system around, obviously how many trucks are going to move through the gates, how much rail is going to come in to deliver reefer containers, how much reefer plugs do we need to see in the port to carry the growth? The only way I could do it was to look at what is the mean average containers leaving the ports on a trended analysis between 21 and 22 at a peak week, and then look at the peak week in 2027, how much will that grow to? That was the only way I could determine it. So Cape Town shows 22% increase in footprint of container movement and capacity requirements. So as I said, the plug points in Cape Town, 3,000, there's no issue there. So, obviously the trucking footprint on Deciduous is much higher than Citrus. So the capacity requirement there, I think, is well aligned. Hopefully we can increase more footprint from the northern and other areas into Cape Town, but I still think there's good capacity, but other constraints we can look at. The other areas is where the concern comes in around PE and Kucha, where we know the plug capacity is limited. And we know we run out quite frequently during the citrus season, moving from about 1,100, 1,400 to 1,800. So a 30% increase in capacity requirement is a very big undertaking. We think about the space to put these reefer yards in the electricity requirement to go in there, either through gensets, which are highly expensive, or through Eskom power or city power. So there again, Wendy, the capacity footprint in PECT we know is tight. How we're going to increase it will be an interesting element we need to discuss from what I've just said. And the Kucher container terminal around the trucking footprint into the terminal on the back of the truck booking system. And obviously we know the constraints on the reefer plugs. And I know Wendy at previous seasons brought in gensets to increase the capacity and also align to wind-bound strategies. But the pricing of generators and diesel, I mean, Noah Murugan and Pier 1 on Monday showed us that they can't bring the gensets and it's just too expensive. So can we get electricity supply from Eskom or City to increase this footprint? We'll talk with Wendy on that and regions. And Durban again is another one, a big footprint. 2,200, 2,600 as a mean peak sort of number of containers moving through the port, going to about 3,300, and that's just an even base. So we can even probably see it at peak going up to 4,000 containers. So a minimum of 25 to 30% increase in plug capacity required at Pier 1, Pier 2, MPT terminal. I know last year Zamo did an excellent job last 2 years by increasing the reefer footprint in Pier 2. And luckily, I tell you, I thank Zamo every time I see him because he put that capacity ahead of our demand. We had such a surge in reefers coming in. He created a specific reefer yard, had some electricity supply put in there, and it actually helped a lot. I don't know what would happen if he didn't do that. So we're going to need to see that happen again with specific reefer yards, increasing capacity at Pier 2. And we've going to speak to ICT around understanding our industry, our growth, making sure Pier 2 has the right capacity. And the footprint of delivering containers and rail into the port needs to radically change. And the truck booking system constraints, in fact, it was highly aggravating going into down the Bayhead Road into Pier 1, Pier 2 on Monday. We went to the vessel, it was completely gridlocked, and the road networks are in absolute peril. The traffic systems are broken, so the trucks don't even know where to stop and go. And I mean, it's the busiest container park in the southern hemisphere, and we're sitting with a situation like this. It was actually quite aggravating to see that. We've got to change that, and hopefully with ICT coming in, they will put pressure into the port system to change that element that we're seeing there at the moment. And then Pier 1, Noah was showing us at G2, G3 stacks, which are currently GP container stacks. They move them into reefers. So at the moment, 800 plugs are available. They increase it to 1,200 by bringing them, and they've moved from gensets to get shore power into this. And he's going to work on it now. I told him, listen, you're going to see an increase in containers. That one readiness is coming. We've got other services coming in. The new Hapag Lloyd service, I don't know where it's going to be positioned, Pier 1 or Pier 2. I'll talk on that now. So we need to really make sure the capacity is in line. So there you can see by the ports what we need to facilitate with Transnet. I'm meeting Jabu and the team from Transnet Port Terminals tomorrow. This will be heavy on that debate.
Again, on the scenario, could private people build container yards where it's like a central drop-off point for containers?
Man, I've been on that topic for a while, and I'll talk a bit about back of port operation and solutions. I've been saying we need a dedicated reefer, and I'm going to show you a very interesting project on a barge network just now, which is actually quite great. But I do believe we need to see a reefer specific rail, let's say container yard, rail yard, turn-in yard, collection point, somewhere very conducive in a central point to our coal stores, somewhere where we can access it via road networks, rail networks, highly efficiently. I've been on that project for 10 years, and unfortunately, it's out of the coal stores' hands, it's out of Transnet's hands, it's in the hands of the container lines who commercially contract that. And also space in Durban is very limited around creating that sort of capacity, but it's not totally impossible, but I think maybe that is a discussion we need to have. And that's why I showed you on those rail projects up in Cater Ridge is going to talk about moving more on rail. That's going to when that's fully developed, will certainly assist. If we're able to get something in the Durban South Basin around the old Clearwood racetrack, which is moving into a logistics park, creating reefer space for turn-ins, collections, and rail space. So yes, very interesting. And then I'm going to show you something about a barge network, which is great.
Oh, please do.
Are we good there? Okay.
Yes.
So talking so we've spoken to this on the previous sessions. I won't talk too much on it, but obviously when we talk about port penetration, the trucking situation, which and the growth in container numbers, as we've just mentioned, these projects are going to be highly beneficial to move the containers, not only the empties out of the port by rail, as Cater Ridge, Durban South Basin, but then having a point where containers can be delivered and railed into port. And then on the back of these, obviously there will be empty container depots, which already is in place by Maersk and Cater Ridge. And I'm going to show you the Balkan site in a second. And as I mentioned, it was a very interesting presentation yesterday. Those are going to be the key winners in sorting out our port efficiency problem around penetration of containers into terminal. And let's see what RCT brings to the mix when they pull in April.
Who's ICT?
So this project, ICT is International Container Terminal Services, the guys from Philippines that are coming into Pier 2 in April. Yeah. I asked Michelle the question yesterday, and she said that's still very much on track. They're getting through all of the due diligence and legalities behind it. And she said confidently, April they will be pulling it.
Excellent.
And we're speaking to Mario. No, say again.
Excellent news that is going ahead.
Did you say sad news or good news?
Excellent news.
Yeah, it's very excellent news. And I said to Michelle when I asked her the question yesterday, I said, listen, why this is so important for us is we've got to see a change in Pier 2. It's such an important conduit for our industry to getting containers to market on ships. We need to see that dynamic change. Pier 2 is really battling at the moment. And if they come in and we see some massive changes there to the positive around aligning to our industry and productivity changes, it then sets the precedent for us having a very big cause to say to Transnet, listen, then the other terminals need to go this way as well. And it gives us more evidence to say this is the way it's got to go. You know what I'm saying? So it's exciting space.
Indeed.
So Yaza, I'm just going to talk to this very quickly. This is an interesting one. It's been on the table in Durban for a number of years. I wonder if you guys have heard about this project. So it came into mix by the port manager at the time, and he was saying, hey, listen, we need a barge network in Durban. And then it just triggered a spark in my brain. I was like, what? This is amazing. Barge ships work in Europe quite extensively, as you know, working in the ports and up the channels to feed containers in and out of the ports quite efficiently. So the discussion on a port barge or two barges coming in Durban has been taken on as a project by a company who seem to be centralized in driving this. And FPT were at one point also very much aligned to this project, did their whole feasibility business case, presented at Transnet, and it didn't go anywhere. So that was unfortunate. But we will speak to Michelle when we see her in the next 2 or 3 weeks about all of these projects we have that I'm talking about, and even this one. So how this essentially works and how this actually would benefit the industry. And I'm only going to talk about the footprint. And, obviously the business case around the actual feasibility of it is where I think the question would probably stifle, or the element that would stifle it. So if you consider in point, the FPT terminal at the moment is sitting over here at TJT. It's going to be moving at some point. I think the way it's looking at the moment, this is turning into a car terminal. FPT will be moving over to here on the Maiden Wharf side, along with the cold facility, which is the ex-Maiden Wharf Fruit Terminal. Start change its name to cold. So your footprint on the reefer side, on the citrus side, is going to be quite extensive here in the next 2 or 3 years. So there's going to be a lot of trucking coming in here, container activity, cold storage activity, moving containers over to the piers. So we really need to see an answer to those potential problems around congestion and just the hyper activity that's going to happen there. So what would the barge network would potentially be able to supply from a starting point empties that are coming into the terminals off the ships on the barge over to this area where we could have an empty container depot potentially put here. Then PPSP can do their thing and get it cleaned up and whatever. And then the cold stores can load them, pack them, plug them in on that facility. Then the barge, when it does its round trip to, say, other areas in Maiden Wharf over to the point area, which is going to be expanding quite radically. We don't want to see road footprint on this Victorian embankment. It's already under huge stress. So it needs to be looked at. And there's a huge project coming in this point area to increase container capacity. So it talks very much to that. They can then move containers from the reefer yards onto the barge into the terminal, straight from the barge into the terminal. So practically, it looks like a really good solution. You can read what it said there later at the bottom there. It'll just remove all this heavy traffic off the roads, and its footprint will then be directly on the port and not necessarily on the road networks. There's a lot to consider with this project. I'll be honest with you, there's a lot, but it really does make a lot of sense practically. But again, it's the feasibility around it, whether it can work or not, and those studies need to be done. Isn't that interesting, eh?
Yes.
Very interesting. Wow.
A question on that.
Yeah.
At Maiden Wharf, they do load containers. So stuff comes in, it gets put into cold storage and then gets moved out, loaded into containers. Does those containers then move around to Pier 1 or Pier 2, like you said? on trucks?
Yes, so in this footprint here at the moment, you've got the cold facility existing here in Maiden Wharf, both their facilities. You've got Somerset, which sits around this area over here. 333 Logistics is just over the freeway over there. You've got the FPT facility currently over here. So in the port precinct, all containers, but particularly reefers, are moving around the port into this Maiden Wharf Bayhead area, including these containers down this road into Bayhead Road and then fed into the containers via road networks here. And look at the rail capacity. You can see it. These dark lines are rail capacity. And we need to capitalize on that. And it goes into Pier 1, into Pier 2. And then also they might move from other areas in the port down to Point. Some of our containers are loading via Point as well on ships. So a heavy road usage. There are containers moving into port by rail. We know the reefer trains, they also run into the port by rail. I mean, when you go there, you see there's massive rail footprints. They're not fully utilized at the moment, unfortunately, but we'll hopefully see some traction on that. And we'll gain access to that. So
the barge system will then, once the container is loaded at, let's say, the FPT or coal, just move it across the bay to the terminal instead of trucking it around.
Yeah, so I know people are kind of maybe asking questions, this and that, the next thing. I mean, look, it's got some complications. I mean, the wind blows and this thing is unstable. You can't move it, you know, and then that might detract the project as well. It caused some issue where it has to go back on road. The availability of berth space, and then obviously all of that is in the mix, but not altogether can be addressed by other means, you know.
And also those mud flats.
So again?
The mud flats that's sitting right in the middle there, that's open at low tide.
Yes, so you can, so I mean, look, the barge would go to Maiden Wharf, it would go around to Point and then come over here. So it circumvents the mud flaps. But in high tide, you can cross over here quite easily. Or should be able to, actually. Yeah. But it'll stay within the channel, you know, maybe mainly in the channel beacons. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned to you, you know, I haven't got the schematics. It's unfortunate, you know, yesterday Stu from Maersk showed us this project, and I was saying to you guys in the introduction, it's so exciting. And coming in at the right time, a substantial footprint that's going to only but benefit the fruit industry around, the capacity that's being built there, cold store footprint capacity, the empty container depot capacity, the rail terminal capacity. So it's going to provide a really efficient conduit between the inland down to port. So you can send your fruit into this area. Either it's packed in containers or it can come to the cold store and be packed from there and railed to port. The empties will be railed back so that the collection point can be there. And you don't have trucks coming down 26 kilometers further along the N1 or whatever that might be into the port. So that's already, the footprint is already there. They're already railing containers down to the port. But next year, 2025, you'll see the cold store footprint, and then by 2026, fully implemented. As I said to you, what's exciting is not only the local footprint, but what we can use as a conduit for further inland into Johannesburg, into Limpopo and Mpumalanga, as a conduit for moving potentially. I mean, we need to analyze it to bring fruit down to here and have that footprint, and then a conduit for whatever goods we can bring in from port to send inland. And I was speaking to Valile Dubie yesterday about it, and I was telling him about the project, and he's very much on par with my thinking here, is if we can get the services back from Europe to Cape Town. The BMW, what used to run, I think they might still be doing it, running their containers from Cape Town to Johannesburg by rail. You know, we could dovetail that in non-operating reefers and truncate goods inland. And I've been saying it about the automotive industry, and then run fruit down to the port. We have a 12-month of the year opportunity to run fruit. If we consider the avos, citrus, table grapes, we move components inland where we can have the containers available and move down. So this provides us that opportunity as potentially as a conduit for that project. Very, very exciting. So and your partners, watch this space. Great.
Is this all new developments happening? And if it is, whereabouts in Bellville is this happening?
Brand new. So you know what? Maybe you wanted to do a session with Maersk about it, and maybe even the other one in Durban, Cater Ridge. I think it's a project you guys will be very interested to see, and I'm sure the members would like to see it, those that are watching. The footprint, look, I'm not from Cape Town, so I don't know, but apparently it's Bellville, Balcon. They mentioned somewhere around, man, I can't remember the specific name, but you guys will know the locality of where this is in approximation to the N1, N2, and the R300. It's somewhere in that sort of vicinity.
Okay.
Good access by road into that area. Yeah. Right, so let's move now over to shipping. So I hope we've captured the container capacity and specialized reefer capacity trended analysis. So that just gives us a picture on where the supply of containers and ships is going to potentially go. But again, it's going to need to be reevaluated as we move into subsequent seasons. So now we're going to look at trade lane demand and on where specific ships are going to need to go and where the capacity on ships is going to need to be potentially expanded. And some very interesting shipping trends that we're going to see based on the current historical analysis. And as Justin will show you in the market demand trend, when we start to see some changes, which we've spoken about before, to market supply, obviously that's going to change the shipping trend analysis aligned to that. So we'll have to update it when we move along. But if we look at the 5-year demand by country, looking at the top 80% of destinations, it's quite amazing that there are a few countries which take a lot of fruit. So the Netherlands is the main conduit for delivery of fruit around the world, and particularly citrus into Rotterdam, Antwerp, in those sort of areas, and moving it inland, either for consumption in Netherlands or the greater Europe. So it does stand out there in terms of its footprint, because that's just really where a lot of our fruit is going. You can see the tonnage there, and the growth forecast in red is where that's going to go up to just below 500,000 to potentially 550, 600,000 pallets of fruit. And then looking at Russia, Russia's, look at that. It's an incredible market, how it's come up to taking position number 2 in terms of supply of citrus. And that's potentially only going to grow. If we look at the trend analysis on some of these countries, they're growing year on year. The late mandarins in particular, lemons are driving it as well, Valencias, but obviously those categories go into its own potential markets. So Russia going to grow as well, the footprint there. China is now the 3rd biggest market. You can see there it's grown quite extensively over the last couple of years, only but going to grow, I reckon, mainly on the lemon front and late mandarins. United Arab Emirates, UAE. In fact, I was speaking to someone yesterday from the UAE saying, hey, listen, I want to have a chat with you guys about how we can increase your efficiency of your penetration into, say, Dubai ports and Jebel Ali and those things. So it's quite interesting. I'm gonna give him a call and see how he can help us on that front, if there's anything that needs to be done, actually. Then obviously we know the UK, big market for us of citrus, is going to grow as well. And then look at that, Portugal, United States, as we know from the Western Cape, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Bangladesh is now, as you see, the growth into Bangladesh is quite significant. And there's quite a lot of growth potential into Bangladesh on the trend analysis in Italy and Iraq. So those are just the countries that are taking 80% of our fruit. And all of those markets will probably grow on the back of the growth rate. But as I mentioned to you, as Justin shows the penetration into new markets, existing markets that will expand, that ratio will change, and we'll rebase the analysis as that happens. But that's the way it's looking on the current trend analysis. Now, here's the interesting one. If you look at the regionals, the Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, Western Cape, the supply into markets, and this is the trade lane. So this is combining, let's say, for instance, the Europe ship that comes into Durban, PE, Cape Town. It moves into Northern Europe, UK. It supplies via Algeciras, Las Palmas into the Mediterranean market. It supplies into the Black Sea market, also Russia, transshipping containers via Rotterdam into the Scandinavia, Russian market. So it takes quite a bit of volume into the north. So that's a trade lane basis. If you look at each of the ports, they also have very different supply into different trade lanes. So it doesn't look, one port is different to the other in terms of the services that are needing to be allocated and the trade lane penetration. Look at the Eastern Cape, there's the Middle East, it's number 2. Now, this is a very interesting one for the Far East, and I'm glad I did this analysis. If you look at the limited supply of citrus into the Far East markets, it is very interesting for me, considering the amount of lemons that are grown in that area, most of which going into, say, Europe and Middle East. I would have thought they would penetrate the Far East market a lot more than what they're seeing there. And that, I was showing our board in that area, is the complication around shipping to Far East and the lack of services that are coming into the port. It's really about the limited number of fruit that's moving to that market, not drawing the services into that port, having to truck to Durban and Cape Town. So if it grows into formidable levels, which I'm sure it's going to, maybe then it'll attract the right services to the port. But that's a really interesting dynamic, and they've always been saying that they don't have good access into the Far East because of shipping. So potentially the Eastern Cape, they might be moving their fruit to Cape Town and Durban, and showing the numbers here on the Far East side because of lack of services. So that also has to be considered.
What type of Canadian market?
Well, it's the Far East service. I'm going to show you the service rotation in a minute, so you'll see what's
on the ship.
The ship, yeah, the ship service. Okay. So the Far East service, if you consider, let's say, for instance, one of the most common ones, the Safari service, which is the MERS CMA service moving from Durban, that goes to the Far East. So trade lanes, the ships move in rotation to these markets from the ports. Indian Ocean islands, West Africa, South America, East Africa. So it's quite interesting. Where's Russia in the mix here? Okay, it's sitting on here on this trade lane. So you can see that the trade lane growth and demand is really your Europe. And it's so interesting to see this year, and I'll talk a bit more just now, is that the Hapag-Lloyd have introduced their service from PE Durban to Europe, and you can see that it's talking very much to that demand. MSC have also announced an introduction of a Europe service coming into PE Kucha. And we know that the Maersk Stayx grouping have the West Africa service coming into PE at that time as well. So there's quite a lot of capacity coming in for this trade lane into this area for the current season. Interesting to see how that dynamic's going to play out. So I'll have to change the trend analysis on that. Middle East market serviced via the Protea and MSC and that as well. We do need to see some extra capacity there. Here, Goldline is actually looking at introducing a Middle East service into this port as well. Coming over to Durban, have a look at the Europe footprint. It's quite extensive, and that's quite interesting to see how much fruit moves into that market. And really, that's where the crux of the issue in Durban is that the services between MSC and SAIX, when they overlap in terms of their berthing window, it causes a massive issue in Durban around how to pack containers for these two vessels. But you can see the growth rate. The trended analysis growth rate shows that the Europe market's going to grow quite extensively on the lemons and late mandarins. But again, it's all just potential, and again, it's penetrating all these markets via the one service. And again, I'm going to show it to you in the slide subsequent to this. Look at the Far East market, as I was talking about the Eastern Cape. Look at the difference to Durban, and that's principally around Korea, Japan, China, your conventional other Far East sort of markets, Malaysia, Philippines, and those sort of things. So going into the Southeast Asia, Far East, and that's being serviced by quite a few lines at the moment, and I'm going to get to that to the next slide. So look at the capacity increase that needs to happen on that front as well. Middle East, India, Asia, serviced by a few services there as well. You can see that only but going to grow. This is the interesting one, as we spoke before, is the USA, Canada. This is only Canada at the moment, but if we get the USA mix coming in here, there's going to be quite a big demand that's going to be placed in this trade lane segment going forward, potentially, if they're able to do it via Durban, or it may need to move down to Cape Town. West Africa, you can see growing quite interestingly there as well, and the Indian Ocean islands. The Western Cape, as you can see, also very much big footprint into Europe. Conventionally, they send a lot of soft citrus into that market. It's also going to grow. There's your USA, Canada. Most of that is actually USA based, and you can see the growth rate as well. Very important market for them. In fact, I read a headline yesterday. There's another issue around AGOA. I don't know if you guys have read into that. I mean, this AGOA thing is up and down all the time. Then Middle East as well is being supplied. Far East again, look at that, limited supply into the Far East from Cape Town on citrus. And then West Africa, and this West Africa and Africa in general is a very big discussion point in the CGA amongst the grower variety focus groups at the moment in terms of its potential for growth. West Africa, you supply via shipping, but I guess Southern Africa would be by road trucks. And then India, Ocean Islands, South America. So that's just showing the analysis on the trade lane growth. And I'm hoping the shipping lines look at this in terms of their capacity allocations to meet the growth rate demands, and we'll have to trend it on some of these markets that are going to grow.
I've got there's been a question on LinkedIn. It didn't pop up in my comment section here. It's Vuchilo Mabela, who's a business intelligence analyst at FNB South Africa. He firstly said thanks for the very clear insights, and then he said, after how long will we get an update on today's session, so to track any changes?
So this Vision260, the actual what we're showing now live, will be put on, I guess, in an hour, if that's the question. But the other one, which I think you might be asking, is the trended analysis is I don't have a clear answer for that, but this document is a how do I put it? It's an evolving document. So as things change, I'm updating it all the time. In fact, I update this document every week as I see things change. In fact, even this slide you see here is going to need to change with the introduction of the Hapag-Lloyd service, the MSC service, and some of the vessel changes that are happening, particularly in Cape Town. But this is what the footprint was up to last year. So, we're going to have an online platform where we can present this thing. And as it comes in and is updated, I can then show where the updates are specific to each slide and each portion of it. It'll be very much aligned, as I said, the market trend analysis in terms of supply to markets is going to have a substantial influence in the upstream logistics around some of the vessel changes, the capacity changes, and the cold store footprint changes on meeting those potential market protocol requirements. So that's the way I would answer it, to say as it evolves, I'll have to update it and then show where the update is, and we're going to have an online portal where we can position these projects as well in showing those updates. I think I might have answered it correctly. Is that right?
Yeah. I've also said to him, well, your email is at the bottom of the screen, and I've also tagged you on LinkedIn in the comment, so you can he'll be able to find you.
Great.
Or she.
So
sorry,
for the
I
shipping,
might have mixed up.
So yeah, you must excuse us. It is difficult. And in fact, on the other side, I get called Michelle quite often. I've got to correct people. I'm Mitchell and not Michelle. So it is what it is. So if you look at the different shipping services aligned to each port, now this is talking very much the shipping lines. Now, when we say service, Dewald, as you asked, let's take a very good one. Let's take SAIX. So the SAIX service is called the South African Express Conference Service. So it's been around for many, many years. It's got a huge history behind it in terms of the lines and how it came about. But at the moment, it's a Maersk, One Line, and Hapag-Lloyd cooperation on sharing ships. And that One Readiness you saw there, One Reassurance, is in this pool, which has just come in. And it goes into from Durban, PE, Cape Town, up to Rotterdam, to London, to Bremerhaven to take containers. Then it goes to Algeciras, where the Mediterranean cargo is transshipped by Algeciras into the Mediterranean and Black Sea. So this is that service that calls those ports. And this is the number of containers that are currently on a trended basis. We look at the peak numbers: 600 out of Cape Town, 500 out of PE, Kucha, and 500 out of Durban. It loads more in Cape Town, which is quite interesting. And then together, 1,600 is the peak that I'm seeing on there. And that's why I asked the question about the capacity of One Readiness, because it didn't talk to this sort of number here. So we need to relook at that. And then looking at the 2027 projected, just on the previous slide, what is the percentage ratio increase on that market? It shows, and all these markets, in fact, it shows that it will need to increase to a 2,000 capacity footprint on the SAIX service, as an example. So, whether each of the ships that are on there's currently, I think, and I'm going to do an analysis on it, there's about 11 ships on that string. And some of them are a bit older. You've got the Santa Claus, you've got now the new One Reassurances, you've got the Hapag-Lloyd ships that are on there as well. We need to look at each vessel's capacity to see what is the current capacity and what is the growth potential we might need to try and talk to the shipping lines around trying to increase this capacity, as one example. So each service, these are all the services that are currently calling in terms of reefer loaders from the ports. These are Middle East services, your Amex North America. You guys can go through this and read, and this is how it sits at the moment. And as I said to you, it's very interesting. This is going to change immediately, because some of the services have been withdrawn. The Few 6 service out of Cape Town, it should be here, the SFU 6, that's been withdrawn from Cape Town, but there you can see they loaded 100 containers. It's now transshipping from Cape Town to Port Louis. So that's going to have to come into it. The Shosholoza service is still there. And let's look at also the MSC Europe service. There's another big one. You can see they load quite a lot out of Durban, but less out of that. So this is just based on trend. So guys mustn't jump up and down if it's not true. So 2,100 total.
Is that per year?
No, this is trended over the last 3 years. And looking at the peak over the last 3 years, what was the peak number of containers on that specific trade lane vessel per port? And these are the numbers that it gave me. So the highest, as an example, the highest number of containers loaded out of Durban on an MSC EU string vessel was 1,000 containers. So that is going to bump up to, and a total all ports 2.1 is going to bump up to 2.5 based on the trended growth rate. You can see on the other services, not too much of a constraint. I mean, the numbers quite interesting, are not too high. I mean, the FAC service runs 300. The Safari, as I mentioned to you earlier, is look at that, 700 containers out of Durban to the Far East markets. If we look at the growth into Far East, that's one of the biggest vessels carrying out of Durban to Far East. It's going to grow to, say, 900, so only 200 additional containers. So I don't see too much of a problem. Maybe the Europe strings in terms of the Hapag-Lloyd MSC WAF service coming to PE, it might lessen the constraint here. So that might have taken care of that immediately, and I'll have to rebase that once we see those vessels coming and what is being carried there. It'll offset that, definitely. So that's going to be taken care of immediately with that. And then we look at the Middle East services and that. So you can run the numbers, look at the numbers on this individually, but it just shows the shipping lines around assessing their vessels, and we'll have to work with them on each of these strings. What is the capacity crunch that we're going to see on some of the ships that might need to increase their footprint?
Got a
Interesting
question
stuff,
here,
eh?
Mitchell. Got a question.
Yeah.
It's from Clayton Swart. I'll put it up on the screen. Clayton used to be with SATI and is now working for Fresh Plaza. Thanks, Clayton. Hi, your competition in Southern Hemisphere are opening huge new ports. For instance, Shanghai port in Peru with Chinese investments, etc. Brazil and Chile are building new ports, while SA is fighting to just get existing ports functional. What more radical interventions is CGA and the fruit industry calling for and need to keep up globally?
So, yes, if we talk about and yesterday, in fact, Andile, I'm forgetting his surname again now. He actually gave an outline of the port master plan. So, yes, we're sitting in a difficult phase in terms of our port productivity and how to get it back into international standards on productivity. But further to that, if you look at the port master plans, now if we go into Durban master plan, there's radical expansions happening in just, let's take Durban for example as one port, but all of the ports have got the same sort of expansion emphasis. But Durban has got a radical expansion emphasis. So if we look at that, that's going to increase the container footprint in terms of their foreseeable numbers from the current 2.2 million TEUs to 10 million TEUs. Now, I mean, look, there's been questions around where we're going to get this 10 million TEUs is the interesting debate, but let's leave that one off. So the footprint's happening, and that's why FPT is moving over to Maida Wharf, because of the container footprint and car footprint. So yes, we are expanding, and it's going to take 5 years to do that. So we're probably lagging behind other countries, but that's very self-evident, and I think it's self-explanatory. But that's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years. Very interesting to see what's happening in Durban around the port capacity development. And then again, let's talk about Maputo. We're going to say in the roadshows coming up that growers are going to need to take a very, very hard look at and strong emphasis on exporting out of Maputo, increase that footprint quite radically. In the interim, while Durban is sitting with its difficult phase at the moment over the next 3 to 5 years. So they're going to have to open up that port without a doubt. And that's obviously then also going to increase capacity. And then the other ports in South Africa also got their master plans. So those are all available online. If you Google, say, Durban Port Master Plan, you'll see it. So we are on that trend as well. I think maybe just behind the curve slightly with our complexity, which we don't need to outline. Thanks, man.
Great stuff. Thanks, Clayton.
Right, so we good, eh? So there you are. So that's just for the shipping lines, and we've got some work to do on that as well. Looking now, interestingly enough, at which ports around the world are moving, containers. I've taken the container numbers off here, so I've just used over again historical base, just in terms of what ports are taking numbers. And there, look at Rotterdam. It sticks out almost 2-3 times more than the other ports. So it's a massively important port for us to supply to. I've already spoken to the reefer manager at the port in Rotterdam. I'm forgetting Sophie, so named Sophie. I've sent her the Vision260. She's already reached out and said, excellent, we're going to meet and see if there are any constraints in Rotterdam around the supply of South African citrus into that port. And interestingly enough, and don't quote me, it was mentioned by her a few years back that citrus from South Africa is the single biggest commodity moving into Rotterdam. Now, one would say, hang on a second, what about bananas and that sort of thing? So I also questioned, but she said, without a doubt, into Rotterdam, citrus from South Africa is one of the biggest movers into Rotterdam. Isn't that interesting? So we can ask her to show us if we need to see those numbers, but that's very significant, eh? Wow. And look into London Gateway. While these are red, these are transshipment ports. So we know fruit moves into these ports and moves out for transshipment, like Rotterdam up to the Black Sea, into the Russian market mostly. And then we do see some USA containers here. And then the other ports, as you can see, London Gateway Port, Jebel Ali, another big one, Newark in USA speaks for itself, and then Shanghai, another transit port. So these are the ones that we're going to need to look at. And I'm looking at port capacity. I'm going to have to go physically to these ports and see what their capacity is and see where there's some constraints, to see if there's any bottlenecks coming in the system, potentially as we grow. I don't have too much concern, but it's an exercise we will need to undertake.
I've got another question on that topic.
Yeah.
Can't there be more transshipment ports, like let's say on the east coast of Africa, let's say Abu Dhabi, Dubai, one of those ports, and that they then ship through the Suez Canal into Europe area?
Yeah. So Jebel, if we look at, surprised I haven't got it yet. There's one in UAE. That's a big tranche of ports. Shanghai, Newark, Jebel Ali. Yeah, so these are the tranche of ports that are in there. But I don't know about, and these are obviously South African citrus into particular markets where I know transshipments happen. I don't know about any of the other major sort of gateways, but just on that conversation, we had an interesting discussion yesterday about trying to look at transshipping via Walvis Bay, catching some of those vessels that move out of West Africa into Europe, potentially in other markets, creating a transshipment link between Cape Town and Walvis Bay via private terminal kind of thing. So those discussions are there. But that's just what evident in terms of what I can see on number of containers on our data. So just also highlighting the number of containers. If I look at each port and the growth rate, you can see Rotterdam moves about 2,000 at a peak, going to 2,600. So additional 600 containers a week probably going to go into Rotterdam. So it's quite a big undertaking. So I think from a reefer point of view, capacity, obviously the movement of containers in and out the port, we need to go there and just go and have a look and have a chat with Sophie about any major constraints we need to see overcome there. Jebel Ali as well. Jebel Ali moves a lot of fruit into UAE, up into Saudi Arabia, those sort of markets as well. That's why it's quite big. So the growth rate not too much, but we still need to evaluate. The other ports you can see in terms of container numbers are actually not too high. And obviously we need to look at USA with the North regions potentially coming in there. That'll potentially grow. So I don't think there's going to be much constraint, but we do need to do that exercise over time, particularly around these top ports that we're seeing over here. And some of the notes relating to some of the issues here. If we look at Bangladesh, for instance, it's got a major transshipment and it's quite a congested port with limited capacity. Bangladesh is definitely something we're going to need to look at in terms of how we can increase capacity on the reefer side there. And this is just a schematic showing you the port outline around the globe, and the red ones are the major transshipments. And there's your question. There it is, Jeddah. Okay, so that was the one I was looking for. So Jeddah is a major transshipment port in
Saudi.
We're in Saudi, thanks. Which then I would guess it moves fruit up into the Middle East, potentially to the Black Sea and to the Med market and that sort of thing. So transshipping fruit out of South Africa into there, penetrating some of the ports around Middle East and potentially into the Mediterranean area. But I'm guessing with the Red Sea conflict, we might see some change there. In fact, I'm almost sure it's inevitable. We will see a bit of change in some of the dynamics around these Middle East ports here, with the constraint of the Suez and Red Sea. Well, not the Suez itself, but the Red Sea. And then going into the Far Eastern markets, a lot into China, and Singapore is a major transshipment port. But I don't have much. And there's Chittagong, Bangladesh. It sits over there. Bangladesh has always been a very big cause of concern for me. I know there's quite a lot of constraints, and it's a huge market, as you can see. So it's a very important port that we need to go and visit to see how the containers are penetrating. Some are moving via Colombia, some direct via Middle East into Chittagong. And there's always massive congestion issues with penetrating vessels and containers there.
On that map, Michael, what about Western Australia? Is there maybe something that could be a transition port there? Is it shorter shipping times, longer shipping times to get there versus
we don't have
China?
Yeah, we don't have direct access at the moment, not that I'm aware of, from South Africa to Australia. Australia do a lot of their transhipping via Singapore, these sort of ports, and then where they have big volumes, they will have direct services into China, these sort of markets directly from Australia. But look at it geographically. I don't see that being a big potential.
Okay.
As I mentioned to you, again, interestingly enough, the one that does have potential is Salalah, which sits over here. If you see the red dot, if you transship from Maputo, if we have access into Salalah, you then penetrate, as I mentioned in the previous slides, via the Suez into Europe and Med. You can go via Salalah into the Middle East, into all of these big markets via main shipping routes from Salalah, as one example, to being a very big potential. Port Louis, again, is another one that's very interesting. So Port Louis, with the Safari service now calling there, and then the few six moving away with the transshipment going to Port Louis for the shipping lines on, and particularly the MERS CMA on the Safari service, are we able to then now transship Maputo to Port Louis, catch the Safari service into Far East? That's a very interesting one. That's a debate I'll be having with the guys at Maersk and CMA on that route. It could potentially open up some really short-term movement into the Far East market if we're able to capture that.
I think if you look at this map, and you think about the commodities we're talking about shipping, we're trying to we're trying to send everything to the Northern Hemisphere counter season. So, you know, going east or west, it's not really something we're going to be doing, and other than what you're talking about Port Louis. But we are trying to get our fruit counter season into the Northern Hemisphere, which is why it's obvious that all those places are in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah. So Louise, you know, if we look at our service dynamic, we're actually, in fact, I was saying to Rajesh, the manager of the Port of Cape Town yesterday, if you look at our birth plans 5 years ago to our birth plans now, our service allocation has changed radically because of the port problems. Do you know, as a matter of interest, what you mentioned there, if we take our Europe services, and I'm going to use the SAIC service because that's the one I watch the most, it comes down from Europe, it used to come to Cape Town, PE, Durban, back to PE, to Cape Town, out to Europe, and do it in a 30-day rotation back in the day with 6 ships. There's now 11 ships on that service. They're taking 30 days just to come into PE, Durban, and leave Cape Town. That's how bad it is. So when we see that change in the next 2 or 3 years, and that's why we're pushing productivity, the ports have got to be productive because we can't have that situation. I mean, can you imagine how much freight we're paying for all these charges of vessels just hanging around our coastline? We're paying for that. The farmers are paying for that. It's in the freight. So we need to change that dynamic to bring our freight rates down and then have penetration, much more efficient penetration from our ports into these particularly this region, the northern region. On the back of that's such a substantial market for our fruit industry, not just citrus, fruit overall. This is the biggest trade lane that we have, without a doubt.
Yeah. And citrus falls into the fast-moving consumer goods category, which requires it to be fast-moving.
Yeah, and table grapes, probably the most. Avos, all your very sensitive types. And then obviously we have more sensitive types of citrus than, say, grapefruit and Valencias, but it's sensitive. We can't, and I've been saying in my groups, Devald, you would have seen, from Durban to Cape Town, you've got a 3-week waiting time for the ships that are waiting outside Cape Town. But as I said, next week it's going to be rectified. But that's what it's been over the course of, say, the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, in fact more. And that's going to change quite radically. And over time, as Transnet starts to get its productivity levels right, we will see a lot of changes in our service orientations as well, as shipping lines get more confidence in bringing ships into more ports and realigning their services to best match our product supply. But from a South African context, we're actually very well placed. In fact, Thomas Eskerson did an analysis of South Africa, and he said, guys, we are a country sitting in a sweet spot. We are not capitalizing that sweet spot. We don't seem to be capitalizing on much, are we? I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. We consider all the bunkering we're missing out on as one example. He says we have got trade lane routes which are unparalleled to other markets in terms of how we can penetrate the global arena here without having to transship through, say, Suez and, Panama and Suez and those sort of things. Look at our market penetration. It actually is really, really good. We just need to get our ports back to international standards to position ourselves. And then we need to capitalize on attracting more services around, other key routes, which is
there was a reason why the VOC selected Cape Town.
Yes.
Say again?
There was a reason why the VOC selected Cape Town 400 years ago.
Yes.
You're going to have to clarify VOC?
The Dutch East India Company.
What does VOC mean? Sorry,
the Verenigde Oostenrijkse Compagnie. It's actually the Dutch name for the Dutch East India Company.
Okay, yeah.
Van Riebeeck's boss.
Oh man, I'm acting stupid. I know exactly what you're talking about. Sorry, 100%. Yeah, that's why. The trade route in those days, obviously the Suez Canal was not there in those days, so this was the main, drop-off point and routing point between, Far East, Middle East, and Europe, because that wasn't actually in existence at the time. And I'm guessing the South American guys, when it was established, also used that as a major sort of transit point by the Cape. Yeah. Right, let's move on from that slide. Now, okay, so I don't know how we're doing with time. I'm going to run through this quite quickly, but what this essentially is going to do is we're going to talk about the summary of considerations about all of the data we've shown you here. What is it telling us in a high level? So we know from the first session, peak production could constrain capacity infrastructure availability, particularly in the northern regions where we need to bring on Maputo, pack containers inland, and rail consignments to Cape Town during peak season. So this is summarizing that we're seeing a lot of bottlenecks on the northern corridor, potentially into Durban on the current constraints, on a lot of fronts around transport, not so much around port capacity in terms of cold store capacity, but port capacity potentially. So we're saying, guys, bring on Maputo. In fact, it was so interesting. Skuman Budere contacted me last week. You know that presentation I showed you about loading containers at farm? They're saying they're moving in that direction fast. So they're heeding the call on that, and I think it's going to benefit them to circumvent what we're seeing here. Let's hope we see that trend on other pack houses. The Marble Groblersdal area is very conducive more than other areas to look at that. And then, as I mentioned to you, we're speaking to Balili and Transnet about how to get Cape Town up as a routing option for the northern regions to Cape Town. Countrywide, an additional 1,500 truck trips per week. Again, it's, as I said, Transport works in an open system, so we can't tell you where the constraints are going to be specifically coming from, but by and large, we see in peak season some potential constraints around transport supply into, I would say, the northern region is probably going to be one that's going to see that quite soon. So we're going to have to rail product. We don't have a choice. As I mentioned, rail is going to see an evolutionary journey quite soon. We're going to have to follow that journey and see how best we navigate into that space. And I'll tell you this much, I was going to say yesterday in the meeting, I think, in my personal view, the shipping lines have the best means of actually getting containers onto trains. Why do I say that? Without the container, you can do nothing. The container is the central point of all of this activity, and the shipping lines control that. So they control rail. They do it at the moment. They have rail contracts. They're in the rail space. So if there's anything that's going to happen on rail, it's a fast pace, and they've got some money to spend, so they can invest in our reefer trains, hopefully. So I'm going to speak to shipping lines about really trying to get them into the rail space once that commercial opening up happens on the lines quite soon. We need to see the shipping lines get into that space. And as you see with Balcon and that, they're moving into the upstream, downstream supply chain. And I would strongly encourage them to get into the rail space, because without the container, as I mentioned, all of these fancy developments happening up north, if you don't have the container, you don't have a business. So you've got to get with the shipping lines and work with them as partners to ensure you have the container to move the fruit. So that's a very interesting one. Cold store capacity does look suffice. As I mentioned to you, a lot of money in investment in the pipeline in all of our regions, which is really, really great. And as I've said, it's one of our best successes as a CGA because we've had a lot of influence in that space. But as I said, however, cold treatment capacity will need to be developed in line with the market demand trends. And that's why I said the market demand evolution, trending evolution will need to talk to the back of port facilities to match up with that. Now, a very important one, and I'll call on all exporters to please heed my call. When we look at the start of the season, it's going to be so imperative that as the fruit arrives in port, it's got to leave the port and go into the terminals or the cold stores, I should say, into the terminals as fast as possible. If you want to prevent bottlenecks of the cold stores, which then leads to congestion on trucks, which then leads to inefficient movement of trucks back inland, it's going to cause a huge issue. We've got to see the containers loaded as soon as possible. Send your loading instructions to the facilities as soon as you can, so they can prepare the cargo and they can plan to get it out. We cannot have fruit sitting more than longer than is needed. It's going to cause a huge capacity crunch, particularly in peak season with the late mandarins and Valencias coming over on top of each other. So I would please call that you look at that as an exporter and make sure you can measure that in terms of your internal efficiency gains. Give KRIs to your vessel planners to ensure that they send loading instructions within an acceptable time frame. An additional 27,000 containers per annum will need to be allocated to SA ports to match production. And Dewald, you've brought this one up. It's only citrus. We've got to bring all of our fruit industry needs into one frame so we can look at that. But that's just for our industry. An additional 27,000 containers. I mean, it's a massive undertaking from the entire logistics chain, not just the supply of empties to our shores to match that. Back of port rail haul terminals, as we mentioned, the Durban ones with the Cato Ridge, the Durban South, the ones that are happening already at Balcon, also up in Maputo. We're going to have to implement those things so that we have good penetration of containers into the ports without having the bottlenecks on trucks as we see at the moment. As you mentioned, pre-staging yards and maybe some of those, as you said, Dewald, some of those reefer dedicated staging areas we'll need to look at as well to effectively run containers into avert congestion and stack delays. Port terminal capacity and productivity, I've mentioned it. We are in a lull at the moment, and we're seeing some green shoots in the ports, but we're going to see a 2 or 3 year lag on getting to some real good productivity levels on water side, on land side, servicing trucks, while we have the equipment shortfall and issues around failure of equipment. And the reefer capacity in the ports will need to be greatly enhanced. And those numbers are showing you there in terms of percentages, Durban, NCT, Kuka, and Cape Town, not so much. So that's going to really need to be enhanced. Liner service capacity will need to be evaluated, as I've shown you. One of the good things with these new services from MSC, Hapag Lloyd, if the WAF service comes into PE, it's going to circumvent that massive demand on the Europe trades. So that's really almost taken care of itself. But the other markets we're going to have to see in terms of that market demand trend, looking at vessel capacity and seeing that we have enough capacity to carry those reefers to markets in line with that growth. So that's in summary some of our main high-level constraints we're seeing in terms of Vision 260. Do you guys have any inputs you want to add to that, or any comments?
No, I think we've spoken about most of these things already.
Yeah, that's right. But it gives you a nice summary of exactly what we're seeing.
Very interesting, very insightful, and very, very exciting. If this all happens, you think about what the difference that can make to people that are working in the industry, all the way from the farm worker to the guy that supplies the tractors, to the guy that supplies the stickers, the guy that supplies the irrigation, all the way through. If we can pull this together, if our country can pull this together, we could be looking at a massive boost to our economy. Thanks for sharing all of this detail with us.
Absolute pleasure. And again, I would say we're going to need to partner and collaborate. We're not going to be able to do this as CGA. We don't have the commercial wherewithal to get into some of these spaces. So those that do have the commercial arm into this, we really need to partner and collaborate to unlock all of these projects and overcome some of these constraints, in particular around the rail space, the rail terminal space, and the like, and opening up Maputo. It's going to have to come from exporters and farmers that have that commercial alignment to those projects, and that's really what's going to be needed for us, and work with the Fresh Produce Exporters Forum. I've spoken to Werner and Anton about it as well. So hopefully we see some collaboration, cooperation with the FPF group that have that capacity to do that. And look, I must say it's out in the media. That Hapag Lloyd service was a very interesting and dynamic project, which was coordinated through the contractor that came into that space, and it was a direct negotiation with FPF members to bring in that service. And that is what it is, and that shows you as an example, things can be done when we work together and collaborate for the better interest of the industry. So there you have it.
Yeah, thank you, Mitchell.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting.
Thanks, guys. And then to end off, this is session number 4. So I'm now done with the logistics and shipping portion. I've heard that you guys will be speaking to Lacanio. He's already spoken to me about it. He's obviously the Grow Development Company. Also have a vision outline for the emerging farmer group, which talks into this space. I'm hoping you'll have him online as well, which will be series number 5 or 6. Although Justin also wants to come in, so maybe have Justin and then Lacanio after, if that's what you've agreed on. But this is the platform where you can watch these videos. And again, Louise Dewald, I'm going to suggest strongly, if you have something to do with citrus exports in the country, wherever you sit, wherever you are in the logistics chain or production or whatever, you need to watch these videos, because if something happens and you're not in the space and you're not aware of it, we can't assist you on that. You're going to have to look at this and then look how you need to adjust your specific environment. And if you haven't looked at it, you're not part of Vision 260, and you suddenly find your spaces being eroded with whatever it may be eroded with, it's only your fault that you're not watching this and keeping up to date. So please, I would strongly encourage everyone, watch these series. They are there to guide you on Vision 260 and the growth on the industry. And
share it with people that should watch it. Yeah, no, I'm not saying you. I'm just saying the people watching and the people who have watched, because we can only share so much from our side between the 3 of us. We need a collaborative effort from the industry, the industry bodies, the exporters, everybody. Just put it out on your social medias. Get as many people as you can to come and watch it. And yes, it is long. It is long. We understand that. But these kind of things.
I've watched each series myself 3 times more. I am so impressed with it. It's so impressive, just what we've done in terms of the information gathering, and the way we've put this together. I'm thoroughly impressed. And as I've said to you, everyone I talk to is just so impressed with what we've done with this. So I'm very glad we took the initiative to do it.
Great
Thank you.
stuff.
Thank you. Right, so that is it for now. We're going to probably have, from what I understand, you guys are hitting road shows for the next 2 weeks. I'm also away up country next week. So next week, we're not going to have a session, possibly the week after that, but definitely in 2 weeks' time.
I think the next time, you'll have to coordinate with Justin. You've seen, have you closed the session? I think maybe let's close the session and we can talk after that.
Okay.
So,
right.
so thank you guys, and from myself, thank you. In closing, I hope you guys have seen my lovely coordinated colors today, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present these 4 series on Vision260.
Right.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
There's going to be many more. I just know about it. So.
Yes, in fact, yes, you're right. We will. There's no need to stop. In fact, we've got so much interesting things happening in the citrus industry, and it's such a dynamic organization. We work for very interesting, dynamic. It's very diversified. So there's a lot of topics that will keep people interested on the platform for a while to come.
Yes, and any questions, Mitchell's email is at the bottom. We are open to questions. We can answer what we can. And the rest, those that we can't, we'll refer to Mitchell and the CGA and FPF and so forth.
Thank you.
Right.
Have a good week.
Cheerio.